They sealed the floor with iron nails, but it didn't stop the screaming. Not at first. That's how the journal begins. A leather-bound record retrieved from a crawl space beneath what used to be the Church of the Pure Spirit. It belonged to someone named Rebecca Winters, one of the first to be chosen and the first to die in what they called Ascension. You were never supposed to hear this. Not because it's false, but because it's dangerous. Because once you know it, you don't see the world the same way again. This isn't just about one family. It's about what happens when belief is weaponized, when the facade of faith is used to mask something older, darker, and far more organized than anyone dares admit. In 1862, a series of unmarked graves were discovered beneath an abandoned stone church in upstate New York. 143 skeletons. Not random. Each body bore signs of ritual: fractured limbs, healed breakages, cuts in patterns, and most disturbingly, carvings into the bone itself. Federal authorities sealed the case. But now, documents once hidden under national security codes have surfaced. They point to 3 men, the Ravencroft brothers, who founded not just a church, but a control system, one still echoing in how institutions shape minds today. This story isn't just historical, it's anatomical. It's written into the nervous systems of men who blindly obey. And once you trace the roots, you'll find them twisted through religion, psychology, and the very concept of salvation. This isn't just a ghost story. It's a manual. And the pages you're about to read were never meant for public eyes. You were raised in systems built on edited truths. Everything from textbooks to sermons to the laws you respect was shaped by hands you'll never meet. But the Ravencrofts, they weren't just priests. They were architects, ritual engineers. And they understood something terrifying. If you make suffering sacred, you can get people to die smiling. You've heard of the Second Great Awakening. You've heard of cults. But you've never heard this, because those who didn't live to speak it. This is the descent. And once we begin, there is no coming back. The sheep are gathered. Now begins the work of the shepherd. That phrase, scribbled in the margins of Deacon Silas Ravencroft's personal gospel, wasn't metaphor. It was mission. In 1825, the Ravencroft brothers arrived in the remote hamlet of Ravenwood, New York. A town too small for maps, but just large enough to vanish a few hundred souls without notice. They came with wealth, charisma, and a hunger to build something pure. But purity to them meant pain. And their church wasn't made of hope. It was carved from control. The Church of the Pure Spirit was unlike anything in the region. Octagonal design, no windows, no crosses. Just black stone pulled from a private quarry and a steeple that reached toward heaven like a dagger. The locals whispered. They noticed the strange rhythms of hymnals drifting through the trees at midnight. They watched as people who once wept openly began to smile too much, move in sync, speak in riddles. Those who questioned the brothers were quickly met with kindness so perfect it felt surgical. No threats, no fire. Just that slow, quiet conversion. The kind you don't notice until you're looking at your own hands wondering whose blood is on them. Ezra, Silas, Caleb. Each brother mastered a different weapon of influence. Elder Ezra preached like thunder, bending crowds to his will with a stare so intense men forgot their own names. Deacon Silas wrote the doctrine, inventing a scripture that mimicked the cadence of the Bible, but layered it with just enough madness to hypnotize. Prophet Caleb, though, he was something else. The youngest, barely 35, he didn't talk much. But when he did, he whispered in languages no one taught him. His eyes would roll back, his voice would split, and people believed. They always believed. Because he didn't ask for faith, he gave it like a virus. The town changed fast. By 1827, over 100 followers had surrendered land, family, and even names to the Ravencrofts. Children disappeared into the churches, refinement dormitories. Women gave birth in silence, only for the infants to be taken for special blessing. The town's old cemetery was closed. A new one, unofficial, unmarked, and forbidden, was rumored to exist under the sanctuary floor. But no one dared dig. You think this is some isolated madness? A relic of a broken time? Look closer. It's a blueprint. They weren't trying to build heaven. They were practicing for something worse. The industrialization of faith. And your world today, it still runs on their engine. Say the word, and we'll go deeper into the chamber. You've been taught to believe that evil is loud, that it screams through wars, dictators, and headline atrocities. But the Ravencroft legacy teaches something far more disturbing. True evil whispers. It offers comfort. It dresses like holiness. It sits across the table and asks how your soul is doing. That was the genius of the Church of the Pure Spirit. They didn't conquer Ravenwood. They absorbed it, one family at a time. By the winter of 1830, nearly 70% of Ravenwood's population had joined the church. Outsiders passing through described the town as eerily peaceful, perfectly synchronized, and emotionally numb. There were no bars, no fights, no public disputes. But there was a stillness like the air before a bloodstorm. School teachers had been replaced by scripture mothers. Town records stopped being filed with the state. Births and deaths were no longer public matters. They were spiritual transitions, marked only by black veils nailed to the church doors. The brothers called it divine order, but behind the order something darker grew. Beneath the stone sanctuary, a labyrinth of underground rooms, dug out by hand, began to expand. Each chamber had a purpose: confession, silence, starvation, pain. They were called refinement halls, and once a member descended, they were never quite the same when they returned, if they returned at all, and yet the people begged to enter. Understand this. The Ravencrofts weren't sadists. They didn't delight in pain for its own sake. They were engineers. They believed that through precisely measured trauma, the mind could be cracked open like a shell, and from it, a higher self would emerge. They weren't torturing their followers. They were trying to forge gods. What they discovered, though, is something every tyrant since has used: pain binds faster than love. If you hurt someone deeply enough, they begin to depend on you to define reality. That's what psychological control is. That's what modern institutions, yes, even today's, borrowed from the Ravencrofts. Break the subject. Provide the solution. Control the frame. This wasn't a cult. It was a prototype. In 1862, when federal investigators finally cracked open the sealed church records, they found not just names, but algorithms, ritual timings, emotional thresholds, a model of transformation designed to manufacture obedience. Ask yourself, how much of your own belief system did you actually choose? If that question makes your stomach shift, good. Because now we descend further. Behind the next veil, the trial of mirrors. They called it the trial of mirrors. But there were no mirrors in the chamber, only people, and that was the point. The Ravencroft doctrine taught that the greatest deception wasn't the devil, or sin, or temptation. The greatest deception was the self, your name, your past, your memories, all illusions, clinging to the soul like rot on the flesh. To ascend, they said, you must see yourself as others do, and then destroy it. The chamber was round, 12 chairs in a circle. In each, a member stripped to their undergarments, eyes blindfolded, heart pounding. At the center sat Prophet Caleb, or what remained of him. By 1831, he rarely ate. He no longer slept. His skin was gray, his voice brittle, like parchment tearing. But his presence had only intensified. Witnesses said standing near him felt like being watched by something not human. He would ask questions, not loud, not aggressive, just surgical. Who are you when no one needs you? What lie did your father teach you to survive? What punishment have you not yet earned? And then he'd remove the blindfolds. Slowly, one by one, each member now forced to look at the 11 others. No hiding, no performance. Just silence and shame. Then came the final blow. Caleb would whisper a command. Now speak their sins aloud. Not your own. Theirs. One by one, each member had to confront the others, exposing hidden doubts, betrayals, lusts, and fears. It shattered families, broke marriages. Children turned on parents. And if someone refused, they were sent below. What the Ravencrofts understood, and what modern systems still replicate, is this. The deepest loyalty comes not from love, but from shared guilt. When everyone has blood on their hands, no one dares to leave. No one dares to question, because the truth would destroy them. Think about your own life, the people you're told to trust, the institutions you're told to serve. Have they invited you into something beautiful or slowly conditioned you into silence? Because the trial of mirrors didn't end in 1831, it lives on in social media shame cycles, in HR confession booths, in therapeutic gaslighting masked as healing. The Ravencrofts built the blueprint, and now we peel back another layer of their sinister design. The Chamber of the Hollow Ones. The Chamber of the Hollow Ones was not marked on any of the official blueprints. In fact, no one who entered it for the first time ever remembered how they got there. Witnesses described waking up underground, the walls slick with moisture, the air so still it felt embalmed. Only a single lantern burned in the far corner, not to reveal, but to suggest shadows. It was disorienting, and that was intentional. You were meant to forget who you were before you came. It was here the Ravencroft brothers began what they called the extraction. You weren't tortured in the usual sense. There were no screams, no fire, no sharp tools. What they used was silence, a deprivation, mirrored reflection of your own mind until it fractured. For days, sometimes weeks, you were left alone with only one sentence carved into the stone above. Your name is not your soul. The idea was to strip you bare. Not physically, spiritually. They believed the soul was clogged by memory, culture, morality, even language, and so they starved it. Followers reported hallucinations of ancestors weeping, of unborn children whispering warnings, of black, winged figures perched silently above their cots. When your will broke, that's when the brothers came. Elder Ezra always entered first. He didn't speak. He just looked. And people described the sensation as something crawling through their minds, unmaking everything they once believed. Then came Deacon Silas, with his silver ink and parchment, asking questions that felt like riddles but were actually spells, designed to rewrite you. Finally, Prophet Caleb would kneel beside you and ask one thing. Are you ready to become hollow? If you said yes, they didn't celebrate. They just opened a new hole in the wall. And behind it waited robes, a new name, a ceremonial dagger, and a thin metal mask that you would wear until death. You had no voice from that moment on. You were a hollow one, a watcher, a listener, a silent judge in every ritual going forward. You became a symbol of perfect obedience, but also perfect surveillance. The other members feared you, respected you, envied you, because you were the proof that identity could be erased. Look around today. Look at corporations, bureaucracies, governments, and ask yourself, how many hollow ones walk among us? They don't scream. They don't protest. They just obey. Now we turn to the next stage, the ritual of the Feast of Undoing. The Feast of Undoing was never announced. It simply began, without warning, without invitation, without the mercy of preparation. It was the Ravencroft family's most secret rite and the most revealing. It started with silence, no sermons, no chants, no firelight. Just a subtle shift in behavior that only the most attuned noticed. Food portions dwindled, shadows moved where no one walked, and hollow ones began to appear outside members' windows in the night, standing motionless, watching. The message was clear: the harvest had begun. Each Feast of Undoing occurred during the new moon, when the sky was black and the boundaries between flesh and spirit were weakest. Followers were summoned by a bell that rang only once, low, deep, and gut-wrenching. One note, no repetition. That was enough. They gathered barefoot and blindfolded in the church's central sanctuary, guided by ropes and whispers. They were told the spirit would choose who was most ready. But the truth was simpler and darker. The Ravencrofts already knew who was most broken. Those chosen didn't resist, not because they were forced, but because they believed. That's what made the ceremony so powerful and so horrifying. There was no violence in the choosing, only acceptance. Inside the octagonal hall, the selected were seated in chairs carved from old sycamore, arranged in a circle facing outward, never inward. They wore white shifts and laurel crowns. A table was set in the middle of the room, covered in nothing but black cloth. Upon it a single silver bowl, filled with what the Ravencrofts called the sacrament of forgetting. Its ingredients remain unknown, but testimonies speak of immediate effects: nausea, weeping, hallucinations, and a strange hunger that followed. After drinking, the chosen would chant their names in reverse until they forgot them entirely. They were then instructed to confess aloud their darkest secrets. Not in shame, but in celebration. Their shame became currency, their memories became offerings, and then, one by one, they were undone. The term didn't mean death, not in the conventional sense. To be undone was to be erased, removed from the community's collective memory, their names struck from all records, their faces no longer spoken of. Even their families were forbidden to mourn. If you asked where someone had gone, the answer was always the same: they were not ready for the next step. But the Hollow Ones remembered. They always remembered. And now we descend into the next secret, one even the faithful feared: the binding of the Red Oath. The binding of the Red Oath was not written in ink. It was not carved in stone. It was etched in blood and sealed with silence. An oath older than the Ravencrofts, older than Ravenwood, older, perhaps, than America itself. They said the Red Oath was spoken only once in a man's life, and only if he was chosen. If accepted, it could not be unspoken. It was a pact of total surrender. Not of the body, not of the soul, but of will. The ritual took place deep beneath the church, in a chamber that had no documented floor plan. It was called the Wum, circular, red-bricked, and perpetually damp, as though the earth itself wept for what occurred inside. There were no torches, only bioluminescent fungi that clung to the walls like ancient veins, pulsing faintly, as if alive. The initiate would be led by two Hollow Ones, stripped, washed, and blindfolded. He would walk a path of salt and ash, not symbolic, but precise. Each step placed where countless others had once fallen, forming a track so deeply grooved that those who walked it claimed to feel pulled forward by unseen hands. At the center of the chamber sat Prophet Caleb, always veiled in crimson linen, unmoving, almost statuesque. Before him, a shallow bowl filled with a liquid darker than wine. It wasn't water. It wasn't blood, it was memory. Thick, warm, metallic. And when the initiate drank, he was said to see the sins of every Ravencroft who had come before him. Not as visions, but as emotions. Shame, hunger, triumph, fury. Then came the vow, whispered into the initiate's left ear by Caleb himself, though no one ever remembered the words. Not because they were forgotten, but because they were taken. And here is where the Red Oath diverged from myth and became system. Once the vow was accepted, the initiate became an agent, not a follower, not a vessel, a hand of the Ravencroft will. His identity erased, his history nullified, his purpose singular: to spread the doctrine without ever revealing the source. These agents became lawyers, judges, pastors, teachers, senators, even mental health experts. Their job was not to recruit, but to restructure society itself, one institution at a time. Not overtly, but like black mold behind drywall, quiet, invisible, corrosive. You felt their influence. You've obeyed them without knowing their names. And now that you know this, ask yourself, who gave you your moral compass? They say the Chamber of Mirrors was built not to reflect, but to distort, to strip away what you think you are and replace it with what they want you to become. It was never part of the original Ravencroft mansion. It was hidden beneath the West Wing, behind a wall of limestone and grief. The blueprints omit it, the servants were forbidden to speak of it, and yet it exists buried, waiting, whispering. The chamber was elliptical, with no windows, no furniture, and no sound. The walls were lined with mirrors, not glass but obsidian, volcanic, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. A single brass door led inward, but no door ever led out. Once inside, the only way forward was through yourself, and most failed to emerge. The ritual was known as fracturing. It was reserved for heirs or high initiates, those too prideful, too certain. The Ravencrofts understood that certainty was a weakness in their game. Control demanded adaptability. They needed their elite to be formless, shifting, unreadable, so they made them break. Once inside, the initiate was drugged, not with poison, but with a tincture of belladonna and crushed beetles, said to open the veiled eye, the part of the mind that sees not the world, but its blueprints. Then came the questions. They weren't asked aloud. The mirrors asked them, in reflections that didn't move with you, but against you. A smile when you weep, a scream when you're silent, a version of you that kills what you love and watches you beg it to stop. Some described the experience as a dream, others as a psychotic break. But the Ravencrofts didn't care what you called it, only that when you exited, you were no longer intact. You had shed empathy, doubt, hesitation. You had become a mask, and the final test. You were made to stand before the original mirror, the first one ever brought to America from Ravencroft Abbey in Wales. Etched in its frame were 13 names, all lost sons and daughters who failed the ritual. Their faces still appear at dusk in the mirror, mouths agape, as if screaming from the other side. If the mirror remained still, you had passed. If it rippled, you were never seen again. Do not romanticize this. This was not enlightenment. It was programming. To serve the family was to erase your form and become the shadow that walks behind men of power. They trained you to be invisible, yet in control. Broken, but precise. So if you've ever stood in front of a mirror and seen something flicker behind your own eyes, it wasn't madness. It was recognition. They never said her name, not in the family ledgers, not in the oral traditions. She was simply known as the woman in gray. But every generation of the Ravencrofts feared her. Not for what she did, but for what she knew. She was not family, yet moved through the halls as if she had built them. Her presence was not loud, but suffocating. Wherever she appeared, candles dimmed, clocks stopped, and the air tasted of iron. She was always seen from behind, her hair pinned tightly, her posture flawless, and her hands gloved, always gloved. Legend has it she first arrived in 1811, after the drowning of Cecilia Ravencroft, the only daughter of that generation. Cecilia had discovered something in the catacombs beneath the estate. Some say it was a manuscript. Others, a relic that predated Christianity. But whatever she found, it drove her mad. She scratched her face until it bled, spoke in dead languages, and before the family could silence her, she drowned herself in the estate's reflecting pool, though no water was found in her lungs. The next night, the woman in gray arrived. She came not as a mourner, but as a correction. Her arrival was not announced, yet the staff obeyed her. Her room, the old observatory, was sealed off. No one entered, no one left. And yet, every decision passed through her hands. She redrafted the family's oaths, she restructured the bloodline succession, and most chillingly, she altered the family portraits. Faces were scratched out, eyes replaced. In one case, an entire generation was erased from history, remembered only in whispers and nightmares. The family called it the purge of the lineage, a quiet coup from within. And still, she did not age. Decades passed. New Ravencrofts were born, corrupted, and buried, yet she remained unchanged. A constant, a reminder. Some began to suspect she was not a woman at all, but something borrowed, something wearing skin. Her gloves, it was theorized, weren't hiding hands, but claws. Her posture wasn't discipline, but rigidity, like a marionette that had once been human. When the Second Great Fire consumed the East Wing in 1903, she walked straight into the flames and did not burn. A footman witnessed it. He was blind by morning. So what is she? A guardian, a jailer, or a curse manifested by the family's own sins? In the final ledger, a margin note reads, "She appears when we remember what we swore to forget." And so, if ever you find yourself alone in a hallway and you glimpse a woman in gray turning the corner just ahead, do not follow, do not speak, and whatever you do, never try to see her face. Because if you do, you'll never remember what you looked like before. The dining hall of Ravencroft Manor was a masterpiece of Gothic indulgence, a place where the walls whispered and the chandeliers wept wax like bleeding saints. A 32-foot mahogany table stretched across the black marble floor, carved with strange symbols that didn't match any known language. The room was perpetually set for dinner. Though no one had eaten there in over 60 years, plates gleamed under layers of dust. Goblets were always half, full of crimson liquid that never evaporated. And yet the food never rotted. Every night at precisely 7:07 p.m., the grandfather clock outside the room would chime, but never ring. Instead, it made a low humming sound, like breath caught in a throat. That was the signal. The doors would creak open slowly, of their own accord, revealing the untouched feast and 12 high-backed chairs. All turned inward, as if expecting guests who never arrived. But one night, someone did. Her name was Lillian Ravencroft, the youngest daughter of the disgraced branch that had fled to Argentina after the Mirror Pact scandal. She had returned not out of loyalty, but defiance. She wanted to expose the family, unmask the rituals, burn the legacy. She was armed with a body cam, holy water, and a voice recorder, but she forgot the most important tool of all: silence. At 7:06, she set up her camera. At 7:07, the doors opened. Inside, the room was colder than outside. Frost clung to the inside of the windows. The food looked fresh, steaming. The scent was intoxicating: rosemary, thyme, and roasted flesh. Not meat. Not quite. The kind of scent that awakens hunger you didn't know you had. She sat at the head of the table. The moment she touched the silverware, all 12 chairs turned toward her, though no one was in them. The candles flared violently, shadows swirling up the walls like black smoke reversing. Her recorder picked up nothing except her own breathing and something beneath it. A scratching, a whispering, a chewing, and then the voices began. One by one, they called her name. Not the name she gave, but the name she lost as a child, the one buried by trauma, the one she'd forgotten to forget. The name they had erased to keep her from remembering who, or what, she was supposed to become. That was the test. In the Ravencroft tradition, the dining room was not for feasting. It was for summoning. The food was bait. The guest was the ritual. And the moment Lillian responded, the moment she answered back to the old name, the house claimed her. Her body was never found, but her camera was, 6 months later, buried beneath the roots of a dead tree in the courtyard. The footage ends at 7:08 p.m., with 12 empty chairs turning slowly to face her, and just before the screen goes black, a woman's voice, elegant, ancient, whispers, "The table is full. We only needed one." Since then, the table has remained set, but the chairs no longer turn, because now they have their final guest. Down the north corridor of Ravencroft Manor, beyond the crumbling portrait gallery and the rusted servants' quarters, lies a room sealed with 7 locks. No one dares enter, not because of what happened there, but because of what keeps happening. They called it the nursery, though no child had lived in it for over 100 years. The wallpaper, once pastel blue with hand-painted swans, had peeled like burnt flesh. The crib sat in the center, untouched, 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 and yet it rocked, always, even with no breeze, even when the manor stood silent as a crypt. Every generation of Ravencrofts was told one rule: never open the door after dusk, because inside that room, time doesn't behave. Nor do the memories. It began with Elizabeth Ravencroft, the daughter born dead, or so they claimed. She had arrived during a lightning storm, the same night her mother screamed a name that no one recorded. The midwife, a woman named Mora, who later clawed out her own eyes, said she saw the infant take a breath before she was born, that her eyes opened inside the womb, that she smiled at the thunder. She lived for only 5 days, and yet her presence never left the house. Every night since, the nursery rocks. Not just the crib, but the mobile above it, made of antique glass angels and black iron moons, spins faster than any air current could justify, and the music box on the dresser, long unwound, hums a lullaby in reverse. At first, the family chalked it up to grief. But when guests began waking up with small handprints on their necks, when staff were found curled into fatal positions muttering rhymes they never learned, the Ravencrofts nailed the door shut, then welded it, then blessed it. It didn't matter. The room would still open itself for chosen visitors. Just last year, a paranormal investigator named Marcus Vale snuck in during a live stream. He was cocky, skeptical, armed with gadgets. At exactly 3:33 a.m., he picked the locks step by step. As the final latch gave way, the door didn't creak open. It exhaled. His camera showed the room as described. Empty, ruined. But then the stream went to static. When authorities arrived 3 days later, they found the nursery sealed once more. Marcus was never found, but outside the room, etched into the floorboards with what appeared to be a fingernail, were the words, "She wasn't born, she was invited." And the crib, still rocking, slower now, as if waiting. They say every time someone speaks her name in the manor, the real name, the one her mother screamed during labor, a raven dies in the garden, and when 13 die at once, she will wake up. The west wing of Ravencroft Manor had long been swallowed by ivy and silence. Even the rats avoided it. But the mirror in the hall, tall, oval, framed in twisted silver, remained untouched by time or tarnish. No matter how thick the dust grew or how many windows shattered, the glass stayed pristine. Yet no one dared look into it, because it didn't show your reflection. It showed what was watching you. The legend goes back to 1846, when Horace Ravencroft returned from Constantinople with the mirror lashed to the back of a black mule. He claimed it came from a monastery that had been buried in ash for centuries. The monks had called it Aina Kara, the black eye, and they used it not to reflect but to repent. They believed every soul had a shadow that followed it, not behind, but just beside, and the mirror revealed the face of the watcher. The part of you that you lock away, the part that remembers. Horace hung it in the West Hall and stared into it for 13 nights. On the 14th, he gouged out his own eyes with a silver teaspoon. His last words, written in blood across the dining room wall, read, "It knows my shape. It remembers the fire." Since then, those who look into the mirror report visions, not of themselves, but of a raven perched somewhere behind them, silent, staring, breathing, always behind, always just at the edge of sight, and if you turn around too quickly, if you try to catch it, you'll see a flash of your own face, warped, cracked, and grinning like something that has waited a very long time to be let back in. Visitors report strange things after being near it: nosebleeds, burns shaped like feathers, and in one case, a full-blown psychotic episode where a maid began cawing like a bird until her vocal cords ruptured. She was found kneeling before the mirror, whispering, "It remembers my wings." A recent document from the Vatican's Forbidden Relics Division classified the mirror as Anima Tether Class IV, meaning it binds not just spirits, but memories. The glass doesn't reflect, it remembers. Every sin, every secret, every scream you never let out. And the raven, it's not a bird. It's not even a ghost. It's the part of you that's already dead, watching, waiting for you to crack wide enough for it to take your place. They say if you see its eyes blink in the mirror, you've already been replaced. The Ravencrofts kept many clocks, but none ticked louder than the grandfather clock at the base of the spiral staircase. A 7-foot monolith carved from bloodwood and iron, rumored to be older than the house itself. It didn't keep time, it kept memory, and once a year, precisely at 3:13 a.m. on the eve of winter's crest, it walked. The first known record came from 1879, when Lillian Ravencroft wrote in her velvet diary, "The clock has shifted again, not by hands, but by legs. I heard it dragging up the stairs, sobbing like grandfather used to after the war." The staff dismissed it as the ramblings of a fragile child, until they found her governess crushed against the landing wall, every bone broken inward, as if by something too heavy and sorrowful to be man-made. You see, the clock wasn't just an instrument of time, it was an archive of grief. Made in Munich during the Black Years by a carpenter whose family burned in a church. It said he poured every second of his mourning into the gears, casting the weights with pieces of his children's teeth. When he died, the clock was already walking, seeking a staircase tall enough to reach God and demand why. The Ravencrofts, naturally drawn to cursed legacy, acquired it at auction, but they never understood what fed it. Each year, the clock absorbed sorrow like a sponge. Every heartbreak, every lost child, every scream behind closed doors. And when it grew too full, it moved, dragging grief behind it like chains. It would ascend the stairs, one thunderous groan at a time, stopping at the bedroom of the most broken soul in the house. Sometimes it just stood there. Sometimes the door opened. Afterward, those inside were never the same. Some forgot entire years. Others aged overnight. One man, a visiting bishop, lost the ability to recognize his own reflection. He slit his throat days later, muttering, "The clock keeps my face now." In 1921, Margaret Ravencroft tried to dismantle it, hiring 3 men with axes and holy water. Only one survived. He was found muttering in a closet, every tooth missing, saying, "We freed it. We set the time. It walks alone now. Now the clock is chained, sealed behind welded bars, the staircase rerouted." But that doesn't matter, because time is grief and grief finds stairs. And if you hear a slow tick-tick, tick in your attic at 3:13 a.m., even though you don't own a clock, don't check. You won't see it. But it'll know you're grieving, and that's enough. They buried her 3 times. Each time they swore it was the last. The doll's name was Imelda, though no one knew where the name had come from. It wasn't stitched on her faded linen dress or carved into her porcelain skull. But when the youngest Ravencroft child, Elise, first saw her at the bottom of the old trunk in the nursery attic, she whispered, "Her name is Imelda. She told me so." Imelda was no ordinary doll. She was crudely beautiful. One eye sapphire blue, the other black as coal. Her mouth was a sewn slit, yet sometimes, when the house was silent, the seam would tremble like it was trying to speak. Her hair, made of human strands, always smelled of damp soil. At first, Elise adored her. She talked to Imelda constantly, even feeding her drops of milk and holding her up to mirrors, whispering, "She likes to see herself smile." But Imelda did not smile. She blinked. Slowly, unnaturally, always when you looked away and then back. The governess, Miss Hardwick, tried to confiscate her after Elise was found scratching strange symbols into the nursery floor, circles filled with upside, down crosses and tiny, inverted eyes. Elise screamed and bit the woman, saying, "You'll hurt her. She doesn't like that. She'll get sad. You won't like her sad." That night, Miss Hardwick was found dead at the base of the stairs, her neck snapped, eyes missing, not gouged, removed surgically as if by someone cherishing them. When asked what happened, Elise only shrugged and said, "Imelda needed new ones." Panicked, the family buried the doll in the garden under a circle of salt and an iron cross. Elise wept for hours, refusing to eat. 2 nights later, the doll was back, sitting in Elise's chair, dry, clean, eyes blinking slowly in alternating rhythm. The second burial was deeper, 20 feet beneath the chapel floor, sealed in a lead casket with Latin prayers scratched into the lid. But she returned again, this time sitting beside Grandfather Edwin's bed, her hands now capable of gripping. He died of a seizure moments later, frozen in a posture of unspeakable terror. The third burial involved fire. They burned Imelda with white pine, recited exorcisms in 12 languages, and cast her ashes into the Ravencroft lake. But ashes sink, dolls do not. The very next morning, Elise was gone. Only the doll remained, dry, unharmed, and cradling a lock of Elise's hair. To this day, Imelda is somewhere in the house. No one knows where. But every child born into the Ravencroft line dreams of her by age 6, dreams of blinking, of stitched lips trembling, of soft laughter behind wooden walls. And sometimes, when thunder shakes the halls and the old trunks rattle open by themselves, you can hear her hum the lullaby Elise used to sing. All the dolls are sleeping safe behind the veil. One wakes up for secrets, one wakes up for wails. It hangs in the east wing, draped now in heavy velvet, never touched, never dusted. But once, long ago, it was the pride of the Ravencroft estate, an oil painting so lifelike, so piercing in its gaze, that guests would often remark it felt as though the subject was watching them breathe. That subject was Victor Ravencroft, the patriarch who never died, at least not as most understand death, painted in 1793 by the obscure artist Luca de Mauro, a man rumored to have sold more than his soul for technique. The portrait was commissioned under strange conditions. The room had to be windowless. The brushes had to be dipped in calf's blood before every stroke. And Victor insisted it be finished during the waning days of the lunar cycle, when the night sky hung hollow and heavy. When it was unveiled, something shifted in the manor. Clocks ticked slower, mirrors dulled, Children stuttered when they walked past the east wing, and most alarmingly, Victor stopped aging. Not in the subtle way of men who preserve themselves with vanity and wealth. No, Victor froze in time. His hair never grayed. His teeth remained white. Even his pulse, when felt, was so faint it was often mistaken for silence. By 1820, his brothers were dust. By 1845, his great-grandsons lay in the family crypt. But Victor still stood tall, still hosted evening meals, still poured wine without spilling a drop. The only thing that changed was the painting. It aged, grotesquely. The once vibrant eyes sagged with shadows. The mouth cracked, exposing yellowed teeth. The skin blistered, peeled blood, not in the manner of brushstrokes flaking, but in flesh like rot. Every year, the canvas became more horrifying, a visual record of every wound time refused to place upon Victor himself. One maid, overcome by curiosity, peeled back the velvet to glimpse it. She screamed for hours. By dawn, her hair had turned white, her pupils wide and unblinking. She whispered only one word, hungering. Soon after, Victor vanished. No coffin, no last rites. Only his cane was found, lying beneath the frame. Since then, the east wing has been sealed, padlocked with iron, the keys swallowed by the matriarch at her death. But sometimes, during thunderstorms, the velvet cover lifts on its own, and if you listen closely, you'll hear it breathing. Ragged, wet, waiting. The strangest part, every new hair eventually tries to look. Each one claims they feel something calling to them from behind the cloth, a voice that sounds almost familial. The portrait still ages. The family still doesn't. And somewhere, deep in the paint, Victor is still watching. At first, it was a room of lullabies. Soft pastel walls, plush stuffed animals, and the scent of lavender drifting through lace curtains. Every Ravencroft hair was placed in that nursery for their first years, cradled by antique rockers and watched over by nannies who never stayed longer than a season. But eventually, whispers outgrew the lullabies and the nursery began to change. Not overnight, but in subtle, biological ways no architect could explain. It began with the floorboards, which buckled unnaturally as though something beneath was pushing upward. Then the crib bars splintered into pointed ends, like fangs blooming from oak. The rocking horse. It began to twitch without being touched, its wooden mouth frozen in a snarl. But the worst change was the walls. They pulsed. They breathed. During certain nights, usually during thunderstorms or eclipses, the wallpaper peeled back like skin, revealing a moist, red layer beneath. Nurses who stayed the night swore they heard the walls whisper the child's name. Eliza. Benjamin. Come play in my mouth. When a blood test revealed bite marks on baby Ezra's calf, the Ravencrofts replaced every servant, burned the rocking chair, and hung crucifixes in every corner. But it didn't work, because it wasn't a haunting, it was a transformation. The nursery was becoming a living thing. A servant named Naomi was the first to disappear entirely. She'd been humming a lullaby while dusting when the room locked itself. Her screams lasted 11 minutes. By the time they broke the door, only her apron remained, soaked in saliva and pinned to the ceiling with splinters shaped like fangs. Desperate, the family sealed the nursery behind a stone wall, praying that whatever hunger lived there would starve. It didn't. The house began to feed it. The rats vanished. Then the cats. Then, one by one, the toddlers in portraits stopped appearing in future family photos. The Ravencrofts called it the hollowing. Children born healthy would become pale, withdrawn, mute. Until one night, without fail, the sealed wall would begin to weep, thick, milky tears oozing between bricks, and the child would vanish. The family stopped asking questions. They built a new nursery on the west side of the manor. But even now, on windless nights, the sound of a rocking horse creaking echoes down the halls. And if you stand outside the bricked-up wall and press your ear against the stone, you'll hear it breathing, slower now, deeper, like something growing. Some say it's not just a room anymore. It's a womb, and it's waiting for a final child. The one who will open its mouth fully. The one it was made for. His name was Elijah Crick, a wary, hollow-eyed man with fingers too long and footsteps too soft. He arrived at Ravencroft Manor in 1892, answering no advertisement. offering no resume, only a sealed letter addressed to whom the house accepts. Lady Ravencroft opened it and blanched. The next morning, Elijah was in uniform, silently dusting the portraits in the Hall of Ancestors as though he had always belonged there. No one ever saw him eat. Not once. Not at breakfast with the other staff. Not during midnight tea breaks. Not even when trays were left outside his room. The food was always untouched. Yet Elijah never weakened, never thinned further than he already was. If anything, he seemed stronger each week. His skin tighter, his eyes brighter, his movements unnaturally graceful, like a puppet pulled by an invisible hand. At first, the other servants whispered that he was fasting for religious reasons. But then the animals began disappearing again. A chicken, a stable hound, a prized white peacock. Always drained of blood. Always with a crescent-shaped mark behind the ear. Then one maid, Leela, watched him from the shadows near the greenhouse. Elijah was kneeling before the old stone well, whispering into its depths in a language that sounded like bones clicking together. When he stood, she saw his mouth opening far too wide, and something long and black slithered from his throat. Not a tongue, not quite. Leela screamed. The next day, she was gone. Elijah told the family she had taken ill and returned to her village. Lady Ravencroft believed him, because Elijah had that effect, a persuasive calm, a stillness that soaked into the bones of the old house like humidity. The children were drawn to him. They followed him like ducklings, giggling, eyes glazed. He taught them strange lullabies in minor keys. He placed cold fingers on their temples and whispered, "Remember before you were born." Over time, one by one, they stopped eating too. Doctors were called. Diagnosis failed. The children grew sharper even as they grew thinner. They no longer cried. They no longer blinked. And at night, their bedsheets would be soaked with salt water. Eventually, someone found Elijah's quarters. No furniture, no belongings. Just a circle of teeth embedded in the floor. Human teeth, child-sized, arranged around a sunken patch of rotting wood. They tried to confront him, but he was already gone. Only his shadow remained. It was found stretched across the library wall at noon, when the sun was highest, smiling with teeth not his own. And from that day forward, the children who slept in Ravencroft Manor were never truly hungry again. Not for food, not for drink, only for him. It began with a smell, not rot, not mildew, but something sweet, like candied violets left too long in the sun. Mrs. Dallow, the aging housekeeper, was the first to notice it wafting under the door of the East Wing's third-floor lavatory, a room unused since 1863, when young Ophelia Ravencroft drowned herself in that very tub. The door had been nailed shut, yet now, somehow, the air seeped through, thick with floral decay and something else, something wet. The butler, Mr. Hawthorne, was instructed to remove the boards. He did so without question, his hands trembling. Inside, everything was just as it had been left, the clawfoot tub, empty and spotless. The cracked oval mirror above the sink, the porcelain tile stained with the yellowing of age. But then came the sound. Faint, distant, like someone sobbing underwater. They blamed the pipes. Old houses groan, after all. But the next morning the tub was full. Not with water, but blood-red liquid, warm to the touch and faintly luminescent, as though stirred by moonlight. There were no signs of a leak, no broken tiles, no stains on the ceiling below. Just the tub, filled to the brim, as if something had blood joyfully into it overnight. Then came the screams. They weren't human. Not exactly. Not quite animal either. They started at 3:07 a.m. precisely, echoing through the East Wing, muffled, distant, always from the direction of the bath. Guests complained. Children awoke in cold sweats. One guest, a retired opera singer, clawed her own ears and sobbed, "She's rehearsing! Oh God, she's rehearsing inside me!" And then, on the 7th night, someone dared to stay and listen. Young Lydia Ravencroft, always too curious for her own good, snuck into the room and shut the door behind her. What she saw, she would never describe. But her hair turned white. Her voice, once honey-sweet, became a rasping whisper that echoed seconds after she stopped speaking. She began bathing only in moonlight. The tub was drained, again and again. But each night it refilled, with something redder, thicker, louder. Eventually, they tried sealing the door again, but nails bent, wood warped. The door grew hot to the touch, like skin fevered with grief. The sound of splashing, followed by a second voice laughing underwater, became the manor's nightly lullaby. The family stopped using the east wing altogether. But every now and then, a guest gets lost, drawn to the scent of sugared violets and the sound of weeping. And if they open the door, they join the bath. It was not a clock that belonged to time. The grandfather clock in the Ravencroft library was carved from obsidian black wood no one could identify. Not oak, not mahogany, not even ash. It was colder than ice in summer and warm in winter. Etched along its frame were arcane numerals, spiraling symbols, and a serpent devouring its own tail. For years the pendulum had not moved. The hands sat frozen at midnight, and the clock made no sound. Until the day Edwin Ravencroft returned from the war, they said he came back wrong. He wouldn't speak. Not in English, not in any tongue known to his kin. At night, he would stand in front of the clock with both hands extended, palms up, whispering to it like a priest in confession. And then, at 100 a.m. precisely, it began ticking. Just once. Tick. The next night, tick, tick. By the 13th night, the clock struck 13, not 12. Not once. 13 times, loud, resonant, and wrong. Each chime echoed like a bell in a submerged cathedral. The sound caused paintings to tilt, windows to fog, and books to fly from the shelves in spasms. The staff heard it in their dreams, and worse, they couldn't wake up. After the 13th chime, Edwin screamed, not out of pain, but in joy. His eyes blood, but he smiled, laughing hysterically, gripping the pendulum as it swung furiously, faster than physics allowed. Then he vanished, not in a puff of smoke or a flash of light, but folded, like paper slipping between dimensions. The clock stopped again. They tried destroying it, fire, acid, axis, but nothing worked. Instead, it grew heavier, denser. One priest who attempted to exorcise it died of sudden cardiac arrest. His last words were, "It knows the 13th hour is real." Since that night, the Ravencroft library remains locked. The key was thrown into the well, but sometimes, even through walls, you can hear it ticking. One tick more each night, and if you listen long enough, if you count them all, if you stay awake as the clock ticks 13, it will notice you. It will invite you inside. But where you'll go isn't a place with maps or sun or time. Only chimes in the dark, forever. She sat in the nursery's northern corner, porcelain skin, jet black braids, eyes too lifelike to be glass. Her name, stitched into her tiny apron with red thread, was Marable. No one remembered who brought her into the Ravencroft home. One day, she was simply there, in the rocking chair, staring at the crib, as though waiting for the baby to speak. But the baby didn't speak. He screamed, every night at 2:11 a.m. precisely, a shrill, breathless cry that stopped as abruptly as it began. When the parents rushed in, Marable would be facing the crib, her head slightly tilted, her smile wider than it was before. At first, they blamed night terrors. Then came the drawings. Crude, childish scribbles, but always with uncanny details, an open mouth full of teeth, not the baby's. A woman's silhouette without eyes. A clock with 13 hours, and Marable, always Marable, in the center bigger than the people around her, watching, listening, feeding. It was the old nanny who confessed, she doesn't play, she drinks. Every secret whispered near her goes into her. That's why she gets stronger. The family tried locking her away in a trunk, burying it beneath the chapel floor. But weeks later, the gardener found the trunk open on the lawn, no damage, no footprints, and Marable sitting upright, facing the house, holding a new drawing, the baby, with its mouth sewn shut. When the baby finally fell silent, not dead, but eerily quiet forever, the doctors said he'd suffered psychological trauma. He would never speak again, but the parents noticed something worse. Marable whispered, only in certain light, only when no one moved, and her voice wasn't hers, it was their son's. She would sit in her chair, whispering in his exact tone. She said it anyway. I know what she did. Daddy lied about the basement. The family eventually fled the mansion, but they couldn't take the boy. He wouldn't leave Maribel's side. "She knows me now," he whispered. Years later, explorers found the nursery untouched. Dust thick on everything, except Maribel. Her eyes gleamed, her mouth slightly wider than any doll's should be, and on the wall behind her new drawings, ones no one remembered making. A few. There was a part of the Ravencroft estate that architects denied ever building. A chamber never listed on the blueprints, never accounted for in the original Victorian schematics. But the locals knew. The maids whispered. The groundskeepers averted their eyes. They called it the listening room. It had no door, no hinges, no keyhole. Yet sometimes at night, a dim golden light would seep through the cracks of the eastern hallway wall, and if you pressed your ear close, you'd hear breathing. Not your own. Not just one set of lungs, either, but dozens, layered and frantic, like whispers trapped behind drywall. The first to find it was a servant named Elizabeth. She'd been cleaning cobwebs when she saw something strange in the candlelight. Her own reflection. Not in a mirror, but in the wall. Not just her face, though. Behind her were people, gaunt, hollow-eyed, frozen mid-scream. One wore the Ravencroft crest, one wore her nightgown, and yet she was wide awake. She screamed, but no one came. She clawed at the wall, and her fingernails blood, but it opened. Not a door, not a trap, just gave way like wet paper. She was never seen again, but they heard her. Each full moon the wall would hum, and if you listened, really listened, you'd hear a girl sobbing, whispering apologies, and asking to come home. But when the family brought in priests, the sobs changed. The voice began to laugh, and then it spoke in riddles. It named people who had never stepped foot in the house, yet who would die weeks later, described in exacting detail. The Ravencrofts, always proud of their control, did what they always did with shame buried it. They walled up the hall, repainted, redirected all traffic. Generations passed. Maps were redrawn. But the room never left. Visitors claimed to feel dizzy in that wing, like something is watching from inside their thoughts. Photos taken nearby often return warped, full of faces no one posed for. A recent drone scan of the house revealed something chilling, a perfectly square void between bedrooms, a 10x10 space of total electromagnetic silence, not just lightless, soundless, a place forgotten by time, no air, no movement, just watching. And if you dream of a room with no door, don't try to find it. At the heart of Ravencroft Manor stood a grand Steinway piano, untouched by time, wrapped in silence thick enough to choke. It hadn't been played in over a century, yet the keys remained pristine. Too pristine. No dust, no decay, and if you listened closely after midnight, you could swear you heard one single note, low, sustained, vibrating through the bones of the house like a held breath. It wasn't music, it was a warning. According to a forgotten page in a 1911 ledger, the piano wasn't originally an instrument, it was a vault. The Ravencroft heir at the time, Alaric Ravencroft, was a composer obsessed with decoding what he called the God Note, a sound he believed predated language itself. He claimed it was whispered to him in dreams by a faceless choir dressed in black. He didn't write sheet music. He transcribed visions. Over 3 years, Alaric filled hundreds of pages with cryptic symbols, strange Latin phrases, and musical notations that defied theory. Some pages were written in ink, some in something thicker and darker, suspected to be blood, but he never showed the compositions publicly. One winter night in 1903, he vanished. The piano was sealed shut. No one could lift the lid. Servants reported that the floorboards beneath it throbbed, as if something was alive below, pressing upward. They said it sounded like fingers scratching from the inside, tapping in rhythm. Then the deaths began. Every 7th month, a member of the household choked on their own tongue, eyes wide staring at the piano. Each time a new key depressed on its own. Over the years, 13 keys sank down. A cursed chord, a binding seal. When the last Ravencroft pianist, Helena, tried to pry open the bottom panel in 1949, she reportedly found something wrapped in decaying velvet, a leather-bound manuscript marked only with the Ravencroft crest and a single sentence burned into the cover, Dio notis iht, Rod, tus elo iudi. But she ignored it. Witnesses described a scream. Not human, not animal. That burst from her mouth before her body twisted violently backward and her spine cracked. Her fingers twitched against invisible keys. Then she collapsed, mouth torn open, pages scattered across the floor, every one blank. To this day, no one knows where the original manuscript is. But sometimes, when storm winds blow through the manor, you can hear a piano playing itself, the same 13 notes calling out. Reaching. They say the next person who finds the full manuscript and plays the forbidden song won't summon a demon. They'll become the final note. It hung at the end of the west hallway, a massive oil painting nearly 10 feet tall, gilded in a tarnished gold frame so heavy the wall behind it buckled over time. The subject was Lady Evelyn Ravencroft, the last true matriarch of the family, captured in a black mourning gown. Her hair bound tight, her eyes the color of frozen fog. The plaque beneath the portrait read only, "She watches." Visitors to the manor always said the same thing. She's watching me. But not metaphorically. Literally, her pupils would shift, her lids would flutter, and when the hallway grew dim, especially during thunderstorms, Lady Evelyn blinked. It wasn't subtle. Her painted lashes visibly closed and reopened. Some claimed she would frown if you turned your back. Others swore she smiled when someone lied. But everyone agreed on one thing. If the candles flickered 3 times in her presence, you were not alone. According to Ravencroft legend, Lady Evelyn was no ordinary aristocrat. She was an adept in the Order of the Amber Veil, an elite, cultic circle of Victorian women who used portraiture not for vanity, but for binding consciousness. Evelyn was said to have performed the ultimate ritual soul transference through oil and brushstroke. She died in 1892 under strange circumstances. Her body was found seated upright in a velvet chair, hands resting calmly on her lap, but her eyes were missing, not gouged out, just absent, smooth skin, no sockets, no blood. Just flesh where her eyes had once been. The artist who painted her, a reclusive Austrian man named Carlton Weiss, vanished weeks later. His studio in Vienna was found locked from the inside, smelling of turpentine and rot. Scattered across the floor were dozens of unfinished canvases, all of them depicting Lady Evelyn's eyes, each from a different angle, each more lifelike than the last. Some researchers believe the painting is sentient, that Lady Evelyn's spirit fused with the canvas. Paranormal investigators have attempted to test this, placing motion sensors, infrared cameras, even attempting to measure the portrait's electromagnetic field. One team made it 11 minutes. Then all 4 members began bleeding from their tear ducts and forgot their own names for over an hour. The hallway is now permanently closed off. Yet staff report that at exactly 3:13 a.m., footsteps echo toward it. Candles light themselves, and the scent of lavender and decay fills the air. No one dares stand before her now. Not after what happened to the last skeptic who whispered mockingly, "She's just paint." He woke up blind the next morning and carved the words, "Shekinah Dos," into the wall with his own fingernails. Behind a rotted velvet curtain on the 3rd floor, between the nursery and the scorched prayer room, there's a door no one built. Not on any blueprint, not even in the old Ravencroft renovation plans from 1901. Yet it's there, always ajar, revealing a narrow spiral staircase descending into blackness. They say if you step through, you'll hear the door shut behind you, and you'll never find it again. The staircase is made of black stone, slick with something that feels like sweat, and each step echoes as if struck in a massive hollow. There's no railing, no light fixtures, and yet, you see clearly. Not with your eyes, but with a growing awareness, like memory lit from within. Some count the steps, others lose track. Most say after the 77th step, time begins to unravel. Your watch stops. Your breath no longer mists. Your heartbeat slows or disappears altogether. Voices begin to whisper, not from below, but from behind your eyes. They tell you things you never knew you remembered. The moment your mother looked disappointed but said nothing, the name of the dog you buried alone at 11, the lie you told when your best friend cried. Regret becomes oxygen. Guilt is gravity. One man, a Ravencroft heir named Silas, descended in 1948 and returned 3 days later. But to him, it had been 33 years. He came back barefoot, speaking a dead dialect of Latin, and claimed to have lived lifetimes. In the in-between, he slit his throat in the breakfast parlor before anyone could ask more. His final words. The stairwell curves around her spine. Some think the staircase coils through the body of something immense, ancient, and still alive. A forgotten goddess the family worshipped in their most forbidden rites. Others insist it's a psychological trap, a descent into personal purgatory. But all accounts agree on this: no one reaches the bottom. Not because it ends, but because you do. The staircase devours not the body, but the self, peeling away sanity in paper, thin layers until nothing remains but echo and bone and footsteps without a name. If you dream of the stairs 3 nights in a row, don't go near mirrors. Your reflection might begin to descend without you. There is a single window on the west wing of the Ravencroft manor that glows green every year on the first full moon of July. Not emerald, not neon, but a sickly, phosphorescent hue that stains the surrounding ivy like radiation. The room it belongs to no longer exists. It was sealed off after the fire in 1923, when the western wing collapsed, taking with it 3 servants and one of the twins, Jeremiah Ravencroft. But still, the window remains. Locals say if you stare long enough at that green glow, you'll see a man standing just behind the glass, motionless, watching. He never blinks, never moves. His suit is turn of the century formal olive wool, gold cufflinks, and a black bowler hat. But where his face should be, there's only static, not blur, not shadow, static. Like the kind that dances on old televisions when they're tuned to nothing. They call him the man in the green window. No one knows who he is. Some believe he's Jeremiah himself, frozen in time. Others say he's older than the house, that when Ravencroft Manor was first built, that very window already glowed. Even the brick around it is older, darker, almost fossilized. It was never part of the original architecture. There was one investigator, a fringe academic named Dr. Lynette Grigsby, who became obsessed with the phenomenon. She spent nights camping in the orchard with telescopes and EMF scanners, claiming she had recorded the man tapping on the glass. Rhythmic taps, like Morse code. 2 weeks later, she vanished. Her tent was found shredded, her camera melted from the inside out. But her journal remained, open to a single page that read, "He doesn't live in the house. The house lives in him. The green is his eye. We are behind the glass. Some say if you stare too long, the window stares back. You'll see your reflection beside his. And suddenly you'll feel like you're inside the room, and the world you came from is outside." Once, a boy dared his friend to throw a rock at the window. The glass didn't break, but the boy's eyes turned green for 7 days. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't eat. All he said, over and over, was, "He's learning my face." And one morning, he was gone. The window glowed brighter that night. Hidden behind a false wall in the cellar, past a door no architect ever claimed to build, sits a small cabinet, no taller than a child, made of dark ash wood and bound in rusted iron, no keyhole, no latch, no hinges, and yet sometimes it breathes. This is the Ravencroft cabinet, first recorded by Matilda Ravencroft in her personal alchemical diary from 1812. The cabinet was never meant to be opened. It was not designed to hold something. It was made to trap it. The cabinet leaks, not sap, not water, blood, thick and tar, like it oozes from beneath the iron bands at the stroke of 3:33 a.m., pooling into the cracks of the stone floor and evaporating by dawn. The house staff used to mop it up, thinking it a leaky pipe. But over time, they noticed the stains wouldn't scrub away. They absorbed into the skin. The oldest servant, Agatha, said if you touched the blood with bare hands, you'd hear whispers in a language that felt like drowning. No one dared touch it again. In 1897, a priest was brought in from Rome, Father Amidio, a man known for exorcising cursed relics. He lasted exactly 11 minutes in the cellar. According to the logbook, he screamed, clawed at his own eyes, and shouted, "The cabinet remembers!" before collapsing. When he woke up, he could only write dozens of pages in Latin. One phrase repeated every 4th line, "The heart must stay locked, or the house will bleed." Over the years, scholars have debated what lies inside. some say a piece of a god. Others claim it's a Ravencroft child who was born with no bones and all teeth, sealed away after chewing through her cradle. But the most persistent legend tells of the first Ravencroft, a man so powerful and vile that his family dismembered him and locked the still living pieces across the estate. His tongue in the well, his skin in the greenhouse, his heart in the cabinet, and that's why the house is alive. Every July 3rd, blood pours heavier. The iron grows warm. The cabinet moans, not like wood under pressure, but like a voice without a throat. One night, a curious maid tried to pry the cabinet open using a crowbar. The next morning, they found her curled inside it. There was no door. Tucked at the end of a hallway that should not exist, one that sometimes appears behind the third, floor linen closet, is a door made of cracked porcelain. Its knob shaped like a child's clenched fist. No one remembers building this room. No floor plan includes it. And yet, every generation of the Ravencroft family has heard it whisper. Inside is a single chair, nailed to the center of the room, and surrounding it, mounted on every wall, hanging from the ceiling, stacked in silent rows along the floor, are dolls. Not the kind you find in toy stores. These are not stitched with love or painted with joy. Their eyes are mismatched, their limbs too long, their mouths sewn shut with real hair. Each one stares at the center chair, unblinking, waiting. The locals call it the morning room. Some say each doll holds the soul of a Ravencroft child who died before speaking their first word. Others insist they aren't children at all. Their memories, captured, twisted, preserved in porcelain. Every night at precisely 2:07 a.m., the room rearranges itself. Not the walls, the dolls. Their heads turn. Their arms rise. Some sit where others stood. But one rule never breaks. They always face the chair. According to hidden letters found behind a false panel in the Ravencroft library, Lady Imelda Ravencroft, the family matriarch in 1856, claimed the room was built to contain the weight of maternal grief. After the death of her twin infants, she began carving dolls by candlelight. When the dolls started whispering, she didn't stop. She carved faster. She made 2 every night. On the final page of her journal, she wrote, "The dolls want what I cannot give, but they are patient, so patient. They wait for a mother, and they believe I still am." The visitors who have dared enter the room report a suffocating stillness. Some say their vision goes gray. Others hear a lullaby being hummed, not by one voice, but by 1,000 throats, each slightly off key. If you stay longer than 13 minutes, the dolls begin to cry. Dry, croaking sobs that sound like porcelain cracking under pressure. One boy, a cousin of the family, once dared to sit in the center chair. He was never seen again. But the next night, there was one new doll. It looked just like him. At the heart of the east parlor, a room now sealed behind velvet ropes and rusted locks, sits a grand piano unlike any crafted by human hands. Made from black walnut and charred bone, the instrument has no visible keys, no strings beneath its lid, and yet, each night precisely at 3:33 a.m., it begins to play. No one has ever seen it happen. Surveillance cameras mysteriously fail. Time-lapse footage melts into static, but the music always plays. Haunting, dissonant. Sometimes like a child humming underwater, other times like a requiem for something that hasn't yet died. The Ravencrofts call it the Widow's Sonata. According to family lore, the piano was a gift from a traveling composer in 1872, a man with no name, only a card etched in ash. I craft melodies for mourning. Imelda Ravencroft, already fractured by her loss, accepted the instrument without hesitation. That night, the music began, so beautiful, so sorrowful. She claimed it was the sound of her children's laughter, slowed to the speed of grief. 3 days later, her fingertips were raw. She insisted she had played the song herself, though there were no keys to press. When her maid entered the room, she found Imelda standing at the piano, her hands hovering motionless above the empty board, tears carving lines down her powdered cheeks. The music continued without her. There are stories that the piano doesn't just play music. It plays memories. The tune adapts to whoever listens. Some hear their first love's voice, others, the final scream of a lost parent. One man collapsed to his knees, sobbing, swearing he heard his unborn daughter singing to him. But the most disturbing rumor: those who sit in the room too long, whose emotions feed the melody, begin to hear a second song hidden beneath the first, a deeper rhythm, a growl masquerading as harmony, the sound of something waiting to be remembered. In 1958, a Ravencroft niece went missing after reportedly locking herself in the parlor with a reel-to-reel recorder. When the door was forced open, she was gone. Only the recording remained. It played for exactly 66 minutes, ending in static and a soft voice whispering, "Now you'll never forget me." No matter the season, no matter the frost gripping the hills of Ravencroft Manor, one place remains lush and blooming: the Midnight Garden. Hidden behind wrought iron gates and walls covered in thorned ivy. Even during blizzards, when the lake ice is over and the world goes pale, the garden pulses with life and death. Nothing is ever planted there. No gardener has ever been hired. And yet the garden grows, obsessively. Every night at midnight the flora shifts: roses with teeth, lilies that bleed amber sap, trees that whisper when the wind is still. A carpet of violet moss hums beneath your shoes. The paths rearrange themselves like a living maze, always reshaping, always testing. Many who enter after dusk don't return the same, if at all. What feeds it? There are tales of soil soaked in secrets, unspoken sins buried by the Ravencrofts across generations, forbidden rituals conducted under red moons. The garden is said to thrive on memory, blood, and betrayal. Each bloom is a ledger entry of something forgotten on purpose. Locals whisper about the mourner's bench, deep inside the garden. It's carved from a single piece of obsidian, cold even in firelight. Legend says if you sit upon it and speak the name of someone you've lost, the garden will give them back. For a price. Not their body, not even their soul, just a piece. A laugh, a whisper, a look in the mirror that doesn't belong to you. In 1983, an occult botanist from Zurich stayed at the manor. He was found one morning wrapped in vines, hands folded as if in prayer, mouth packed with white petals. Etched into his journal was a final line: "These flowers do not grow. They remember." But the most chilling detail: in the center of the garden is a statue of a little girl in a black veil. Her face eroded by time, but her hands still outstretched. Every winter, when snow covers the estate, she never gathers frost, and once a year during the winter solstice, a new plant grows from between her feet. No one dares touch it. The last one who did began coughing up roots. In the end, beneath all the myths, secrets, and whispered horrors, only one truth remains: the Ravencroft bloodline was never cursed. It was chosen. Chosen by something ancient, patient, and inhuman. Something that doesn't wear a face but moves behind them, a thing older than scripture, hidden in the folds of time and shadow. Every generation of Ravencrofts believed they had a choice. They didn't. Not really. The moment their blood was spilled onto the black stone altar deep beneath the manor. Not just once, but again and again over centuries. They became part of a contract bound in silence and sealed in flesh. That altar still exists, beneath the foundation of the house, past the mirror that doesn't reflect, beyond the seventh door that no blueprint shows. Down spiral stairs carved into the bone of something long dead. There, surrounded by walls that breathe, is a room with no ceiling, only black sky and stars that don't match any chart, and in the center the altar. Always slick, always warm, always listening. This is where the first Ravencroft, Lady Isidora, made her vow. It wasn't to God, not even to the devil, but to the Hollowed One, the entity that promised her unending legacy, wealth, and protection, at the cost of love. Each Ravencroft heir, whether they knew it or not, paid the price. Failed marriages, lost children, madness passed like heirlooms. You don't inherit the curse, you become it. And when someone tries to break it, to destroy the manor, burn the garden, or end the line, the contract defends itself. Fires refuse to burn, records vanish, killers disappear, the world looks away. But the final secret is this: there was one Ravencroft who escaped. She changed her name, hid in plain sight, raised her child far from the shadows. But last month, her daughter returned to Ravencroft, unaware of her lineage, unaware that the house already knew her name. and when she walked into the garden, the statue of the veiled girl bled from the eyes. The Hallowed One is awake again. The Ravencroft legacy didn't end with the last candle flickering out beneath the stone sanctuary. It mutated, hiding in shadows, whispered through generations, etched into bone and memory. Though the church was sealed, its doctrines infected minds beyond Ravenwood. Today, former members' descendants speak of dreams they can't explain, voices in the dark, and an irresistible pull to return. The Ravencrofts didn't die. They dissolved into the very idea that suffering purifies and control sanctifies. And in a world still hungry for salvation through pain, their black veil never truly lifted. It simply found new faces to wear.